Case in point, I was in the hospital on Sunday rounding, had 2 newborns that were born, see the babies, happy, enjoy life. And then I went and did a couple social visits, a couple of patients of mine that are inpatient currently. And they both have cancer that has returned and has spread. And so with the COVID-19 crisis, their loved ones are not allowed in the hospital. So they're sitting in a hospital bed with a situation that's not the cancer why they're in the hospital right now, with no family. And just, if you can imagine that emotion, if you can imagine the patients sitting crying because they can't see their loved one and they're scared and they don't know what's going on. If you can't be human in that moment, then we're not doing right for our patients. So, to hold someone's hand, to tell them that you love them, that's important.
Hey everyone, this is Greg Washington and welcome to the next episode of Guards Down. I have with me today a very truly special and honored, I'm honored, one of my guests to be on here, John Thurman.
What's up, Greg? This is awesome, man.
Hey John, how's it going?
Been a long time since the prep school, right?
I know, it truly has. Well, look, before we get into it, tell us about yourself.
Young man, born, raised in Medlin, Texas. John and Sandra, sister Tamika, she's a couple years younger than myself. Grew up back in Texas, man. Could I ever envision being where I am right now, sitting here in Southeast Iowa, practicing medicine? No. Sports was a vehicle for me to help me get into West Point. I'm very thankful for that whole experience. The one thing I find interesting about the West Point experience is you had a lot of good football players that other schools didn't seem like they wanted you, but they didn't really want you. West Point wanted us. And man, my life is all the better for it. So, I grew up in Texas and did sports. I played the violin. I played the viola. I tried to be a good student and graduated from the academy. And life definitely went a lot of different directions thereafter. Being field artillery, got stationed at Fort Riley in Manhattan, Kansas, and went with my best friend, Gary Williams. And we went off on multiple deployments from there, and life just kind of takes you in different paths. So, man, left the military and somehow ended up in medical school, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
But look, well, we're gonna call you Dr. Thurman from here on out.
No, it's okay, man. It's John.
Well, look, okay. Before we get into it, I've known you since I was 17, 18, starting in at the prep school. So John has been one of my favorite people. He's been a mentor to me and like just all around just a good guy. He helped me figure out the ropes at the prep school as well as, West Point. John, tell one of either the funniest or one of your fondest memories of me at West Point, at the prep school.
So I think you and Nate Hunterton had what I would call a really special relationship. And Nate had that relentless tattooed on his arm. And I don't think this is funny. I think this is just like one of those utmost respect type of things. But when we look at Nate Hunterton, we look at someone who's a soldier, who's a warrior, and someone we would go to bat with. And the way that he played the game was when I saw you play your last game, I was like, Greg, all you need to know about Greg Washington is he brought it. And the fact that you and Nate and Hunterton were so close and the fact that you two bonded the way you did, it's just a perfect story because I don't know of any 2 other Army football players were warriors like you two during that time period. So
I appreciate that.
Not a funny story. It's a serious story, but it's the truth, man. You brought it. You brought it every single play you were out there.
Indeed. And I hope I can get Nate on here one day too. So.
That'll be fascinating.
All right. Well, look, getting started. Of course, we talk about trauma and grief, right? And so, when a person deals with trauma, well, let me start by saying, I believe that trauma shapes your life. It shapes your why. It shapes how and what you endure, and also, your transition. And so I strongly believe in raising awareness throughout different cultures and groups so that we can help break down some of the stigmas that are around people getting help. Um, I started this more than a year ago, right? But I'm just now getting to the traction where I'm at right now. So for me, when I started, having, come from West Point and been in the military, I had a sense of purpose. I had a sense of pride, and I loved it. And it was one of those things where I love taking care of soldiers. And so when I got out and got into the corporate world and, ended up where I was at, I didn't feel like I had a sense of purpose anymore. And so I remember that day where I walked away from my job and I was like, yo, like I want to start giving back to the people that I know, to the ones that served, as well as to, the different communities that could use the support. And so I started down this path of creating the Iron Sharpens Iron Project and Guards Down so that we could do this cultural engagements to learn how different cultures heal and grow. And so I have been talking with different people from different parts of the world and learning and just hearing folks' experiences. And so like, it's really been a humbling experience to hear how, folks have come a long way.
Right.
In hopes that, someone else that may be listening can be inspired and help save themselves or help save someone else.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful mission, man. And I tell you, the world is big. The world has a lot of different things and people are going through a lot of different things. And I tell you, when I'm seeing patients, whether it's for their diabetes or hypertension, I'm telling you, when it comes to the mind, when it comes to depression, when it comes to PTSD, we can be the biggest advocate for that person. And so as a family doc, I'm usually at the front line of that, right? So where do I direct the patient for care? Do I send them to mental health? Do I send them to a psychiatrist? Do I send them to a group, or do I get a social worker? Or do I just take it and I work it myself? I'll tell you one quick story. Smoke, remember Smoke, Mario? He was a platoon leader, and one of my patients was in his platoon when they were deployed in Iraq. And so now I take care of this young man that I didn't know, but through Smoke is a guy we play football. He's a cornerback. It's crazy. And so that young man is dealing with PTSD and is dealing with traumatic issues. And it's a very powerful connection to see, oh, wait, so that guy. So not only do I trust you because you're my doctor, but now we take it next level because we have that interpersonal relationship. And so when I interact with this guy, he's come a long way. But yeah, so I think your mission is spot on, man. And it is sorely in need in this country.
I appreciate that. I really do. And I mean, and as big as the world is, it's still a small world, right? So
Yeah.
to have, one of your teammates soldier another person, and then, that wind up being one of your patients. I mean,
it's insane.
Right. And so, that brings up the point or topic, that we'll get into later when we talk about, like seeking professional help around cultural sensitive therapy. So, my biggest advocacy is having people to find someone that they can connect with and get help. And so cultural sensitive therapy, of course, is if your therapist, clinician, counselor looks like you or has been through some of the same things you've been through, then you guys can connect on a much deeper level, which will in turn make the treatment more effective, right? The utilization rate will go up, and then the dropout will go down, right? And
that's
all
just
around
reality.
better outcomes. Yeah.
It's just reality. That's how we are. That's how humans, it's something in the wiring that just makes us that way.
Okay. So to get into it, right? Tell us about some of your traumatic experiences or dealings with complicated grief, whether it be personal or with, how you had to dealt with patients. Cause I know COVID-19 is going on now as well too. So
Anxiety is through the roof right now. I'll take you back. So my mom is the youngest of 15, and large family, there's going to be issues that happen, right? A lot of people have a lot of cousins, a lot of first cousins. And the first dealing with trauma or dealing with something that involved grieving was I was about 9. And my cousin, he was 11. He was on a bus. They were going to play a baseball game. Short end of the bus got hit by a Coca-Cola truck, and 6 kids passed away. And one of them was my cousin. And I remember the entire family gathered at Big Mama's house and waiting to hear. And everyone is trying to hold on to each other. And there's, when the news finally came, there was a lot of grieving. And I didn't understand it. I was 9. I didn't catch it. I'd already been to a funeral, but this was someone that I interacted with. So then I don't think you process it at that age. Fast forward to junior year of high school, and my favorite cousin on my dad's side of the family was murdered. He was shot in the head. And trying to figure out how to deal with that, seeing him laying in the ICU, I also had an orchestra trip planned to go to Colorado. And how my grandmother dictated to me was, you go on that trip. We'll hold things down here. Marcus knows that you love him. And I was struck by that because I wanted to be there, but then I also saw the point where she was coming from. So a lot of different conflicting thoughts. So then we get to West Point, plebe year, and a cadet had committed suicide. And so they were going to do the very honored ceremony for him. And my team leader wanted me to go. But at that time, because I didn't have this, I don't think I had an even relationship with grief or with trauma. I was upset that guy took his life when my cousin had his life taken from him. So I couldn't identify with that. I didn't have the cognitive maturity in order to process that information properly at that time. So I didn't go. I didn't go to the TAPS. Eventually I would start going to those things. And then eventually I would land myself in combat. And I would tell you, when people think of combat, you kind of think of World War II, or you think of, just shooting. And these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have been different. It's been not necessarily trauma can come from just shooting. Trauma can also come from people being exposed to bad things. So my platoon actually ended up taking post at a hospital. And so we provided security for the hospital. We lived at a hospital. So I became like administrator guy and providing security services. And the amount of dead bodies that came through there started to get, you could see it starting to wear on the soldiers, started to wear on me. And I remember one of our S3 came to do a visit and to check in and to see how we're doing. And he remarked at the time, "We're going to have to get a counselor for you guys. I can't believe you guys are going through this." And so I would tell you that those are probably some of the first really high moments of trauma and grief that I dealt with. And I got to say, it's just like with anything in life. I don't think that I dealt with it necessarily in the best way early on. But I think I've gotten a little bit better with it through time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So being exposed to it early with your cousin being killed in an accident, and then in high school when another cousin was murdered, and then in college when another cadet took his life, and then having to just be exposed to it in a combat environment on a daily basis where, day in and day out, you're on high alert.
Roger.
Having to protect the people you care for and serve with, and see that happen. So man, you have dealt with trauma and grief throughout most of your life, and I don't mean it lightly. It's just amazing because that changes who you are. And so from you to go through all that to now become a doctor, like, that says a lot about you and your character and who you are.
I appreciate that.
Before we talk about collateral damage, I want to ask about, your upbringing. Did your parents or your family members or someone close to you, did they teach you enough about how to deal with grief and trauma growing up?
Greg, I think I think that's the tough part. I think my grandmother was indirectly trying to teach me, right? She's like, no, you need to continue. Life goes on, right? You need to keep going on. You need to acknowledge, and then you need to accept, but you must keep moving on. Life does not stop. But the number of funerals that I went to for family, it was very powerful responses, but no one, I mean, and this is not, again, knock on anyone, but no one just sat you down and explained, this is what's going on. It was more of a thing where the family would always come together. And that family time and that family bonding time was somewhat the therapy, I feel like, for us growing up. There wasn't, my dad sitting me down and having the birds and the bees talk or something like that. This was just like a collectivism that came from the family. And I think the support came from just being with each other. There was not any specific instruction, to answer your question.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, with all of those going on, what was the collateral damage, for you and with your family and also your soldiers?
I think the family bonded. I know the family was really close, and I think it always seems to have brought us together closer. I would tell you that probably the one thing that I saw with Iraq and with my soldiers is that everyone's on that bell curve, right? Some people are responding to it positively. Some people are not responding to it positively. And then you've got the majority are kind of trying to process it all, but they're getting through it. And being deployed, how things are, you already mentioned, you're already on edge. And I would say that the collateral damage from Iraq is that it changed me. All right. So me before Iraq and meeting my then girlfriend, and then me post Iraq, like the collateral damage was that I was not that as even and consistent as a person as I used to be, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Became irritable. I became angry. I became little things, like just little things like that I didn't have prior to that. So I think the collateral damage from my experiences in Iraq is something that set me back, and I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the equipment to deal with it. And I'll tell you that as I was working through that process of returning home from deployments, a setback would ensue. And I would be doing PT, physical therapy or physical training, and I got into an accident, and I had a posterior lateral corner injury. So basically, I almost decapitated or cut my leg in half. It was such a severe knee injury. So that resulted in 4 surgeries over 2 years. So you go from going to combat, really not processing what happened there very well, I think. And then you have this personal trauma that sets in. And so this creates a lot of opportunity for you to kind of lose your way.
Yeah. No, that's deep. And I definitely feel you from feeling like you're a different person before versus when you come back home. Having to be on a constant alert and state of readiness keeps you on edge, and that feeling or sense of irritableness is definitely there. I remember reading an excerpt or this passage from this research, and it talked about how wars were fought in the past.
Right.
You got it. That was my son. That's the only way that that a phone can come. They got the emergency bypass, so when they call, it's like, all right.
Yeah.
But to go back, and we'll cut that part out. But there was this research, and it was this paper, from this professor at the University of Penn, and it talked about how wars were fought back then versus now. Mm-hmm. So, back then you would get on a boat, right? ride the waves, go fight, right? And then you would get back on the boat coming home. And so you had that time to think through, decompress, process some of the things that you went through, versus now with all of this technology and advancement, you can literally be fighting one day and back home in civilization the next.
Yeah.
Right. And so, we talked about this rite of passage, me and a couple of friends, I talked about this rite of passage into becoming a man, or, into becoming a soldier when you go through like basic training and the whole nine. But there's no rite of passage when you come back from war, right? To say, okay, hey, look, you made it, right? And you are on the process of healing. And so a lot of people tend to have to deal with this on their own. I know we have, the Yellow Ribbon program, and I know that we go through a process of being screened for PTSD, when we get back, and, being on lockdown for, a week or two when you're back on base. But for some that might not be enough, right? Because when you think about what you've done and who you're around, and like you said, earlier, your family is your support. That's your way of healing, right? And just them being there and being cared for. So like, I felt you on that one.
And just to add to that, when I returned from Iraq, I didn't return with my unit. I came back by myself, and then had to TDY to West Point from Fort Riley. So you talk about so then now I don't have my brothers with me. So now I'm clearing and PCSing, no one around. Right. And so then I just show up at West Point. And so then I'm walking around as a first lieutenant at West Point with like the combat patch, and everyone's looking at me like I'm crazy. But yeah, I didn't, there was, and it's no one's fault, right? You've got what's it called? The people, the company commander that stays back.
The rear detachment commander?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, they do their best. But I didn't feel like there was anything wrong. But so anyway, I didn't have that natural kind of what you're talking about being 2 weeks. No, I came back, packed up, and moved when I got back from deployment.
And back on it. I'm with you. And so with that, and of course you don't feel anything wrong because you're in such of a high tempo environment, and how the military moves, that you just think that it's okay because it's ingrained in you from West Point, right? So going from cadet basic training where every 5 to 10 minutes are already planned for you throughout the day to now going into the school year where, you have classes, schoolwork, formations, football,
meals,
study, meals, all that in between. And, everything is planned to, all right, now I'm getting into the regular Army, and boom, I'm thrown in. I got soldiers to take care of. We got training to do. We're getting ready to deploy. We got missions, and it's
got families.
Right. And it's a high tempo pace. And so you're right. You don't know that like anything's wrong. You just think, I guess it's just what I'm supposed to go through. Like, what's the next mission? Let's go. Right. So I feel you. What were some
wife? You met my wife, and she's that doesn't work for her.
Right. So, what were some of the coping skills you learned, healthy and unhealthy, to deal with it? Okay,
so this is, and so this is a great question because I actually work with my patients on this one. We've got all these computers and we're typing and we're listening to the patient, but I like to get like a little note and I'll write out like some things of encouragement. I'll give them like 4 things to do, smile today, laugh, just anything to try to be a little bit more uplifting. So I would say that the first thing that I do is exercise. Exercise is my therapy. Exercise keeps me grounded. Exercise affords me an opportunity to, if I'm on my bike or if I'm running, I can go through and positively tell myself mantras like, I'm going to do this today. I'm going to be good at this. I'm going to be effective at this. Exercise has been good. I would say in the early days, writing was good. Writing down my thoughts. I used to keep journals when I was deployed. I don't do that so much anymore now. Sometimes I might just type out an email to myself. I feel like that's a healthy talking to people. Like sharing these concerns is a powerful thing that I've learned, and being okay to share those things is extremely powerful, because I don't think later on I wouldn't have gotten the help if I didn't talk to someone. And having that team around you, having a foundation, like current day, me and a bunch of the guys that I went to school with, including Greg Washington, have this weekly check-in that we do. We're on WhatsApp group where we've got a happy hour where we're doing virtual meeting where we get together and talk and laugh for a couple of hours. Those things are very healthy to do. It's better in person, but in this current state of things, it's appropriate. Now, some of the unhealthy things, Greg, I think everybody has some sort of destructive behaviors, big or small.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my primary thing is my patience. I used to be the most patient person in the world. And all of a sudden I come back from Iraq and I have zero patience for anything. And I just it started to control me. And it's something that I actually have to remind myself and to practice not to be so impatient with people. Alcohol. What does everyone go to? Because that's something you can control, right? I can go to the store, I can buy this beer or I can buy this liquor and I can drink that and that's how I'm dealing with it. That is probably the most fundamentally destructive thing that you can do. I did it, right? I did. I mean, and that's something, and that's something someone like myself has to be careful with, right? So I was in the military, high stakes environment. Then you go into becoming a physician, and physician suicide rates are higher than that of any profession in the country. So the substance abuse is something that really people have to be careful with, and that would probably be the most unhealthy thing that I took part in.
Got you. Understood that. So looking at how you cope, do you think there's a cultural difference in how, different people cope?
When it comes to PTSD, when it comes to complicated grief?
Mm-hmm.
I think yes and no, and then somewhere in between. I think I've got some patients. I can think of a gentleman right now. He's from Chicago. He was shot when he was 16, 17, had been in fights, the gangs, and he's got paralysis from that. And, he's in his mid-30s now. And that's a heavy burden. And I think from a cultural perspective, you can see the emotion. You can see it in his eyes. You can feel it when you talk to him. And he is very keen on opening up. He will open up to me. And I can tell you that getting someone to open up is the key to any type of therapy or treatment, because if they don't, and they've got this wall, I mean, you're never going to reach them. And I think culturally, it is my opinion that he just not would routinely do that if I were a white physician. The interesting thing with that is that my patients who are white, and there's not much of I don't detect a barrier there. But again, you can misread these situations too. But I feel like people, from a cultural standpoint, do feel more comfortable. Like I've got my Spanish-speaking patients, and if I throw in if I start speaking a little Spanish to them, makes them feel comfortable, makes them feel more at ease, right? So I think there's something strong to that, and tapping into that is one way that we can achieve success with our patients.
Mm-hmm. You hit a great topic that I haven't spoke about yet in any of my podcasts. but it is part of the Iron Sharpens Iron project that we're doing. So, there's three parts to it. And one of the parts that you spoke on was that, or you alluded to, was that there are some mental health professionals that lack the awareness or the cultural awareness to diagnose, certain people.
It's medicine's it's a tricky business, but what it comes down to be successful in medicine is to be human. If we're human, if we let our patients see that we are human, they're going to be more inclined to be human with us, and that's all they want from us. And so I think sometimes we have the tendency to not be human because we've got electronic medical records and we've got to see patients and we've got to move on to the next and we've got getting messages and we're going to so there's so many different things going on. Sometimes it's hard to be human instead of focusing on that person that's right there in front of you. So then you throw in gender, race, all of these other things that are working in our hidden brain and our subconscious. It makes for a volatile situation. And so we have to be very astutely aware, very keenly aware about what we're doing and who we're seeing.
Yeah, I definitely can recognize or relate to that. I know for me, having, going and get help through the VA, of course, and on active duty, I hated feeling like a number, right? And so, when you talk about that human side, I definitely agree. It brings up another question or topic was around a life coach versus a therapist. And so I've read some research where it's kind of a common practice for licensed therapists not to share their background with their patients just so that the patient can have like this feel of not knowing the person and just completely open up versus someone like a life coach who would share in the background, their background, with their client, in order to get them to open up. Have you seen or have any thoughts on that?
So you're saying a licensed therapist, like a psychiatrist or a psychologist. So there are very good reasons for that. And for them maintaining sort of that level of privacy. Mm-hmm. It comes down to safety. But I think I'd have to remove myself from that because it's a lot of the things that they're dealing with are very, these can be life or death issues when it's if you're dealing with schizophrenics or if you're dealing with bipolar disorder, if you're dealing with all of these different types, conduct disorder, if you're dealing with these types of patients, you don't want them, knowing stuff about you because that could be used against you. But gotcha. From a perspective as a family physician, I use my life all the time. I use my background and I will tell stories. I will talk openly and lovingly about my family, or I'll tell them, about this is about my wife, and I'll be like, hey, my dad lost weight, anything like that, or my wife cooked this. Like I like to present so that they can, again, connection, so that they can feel human, like that the doctor is not talking down to them, but the doctor is sharing in this. There's a mutually shared association there, right? Yeah. So I think opening up and being a little vulnerable is positive. Case in point, I was in the hospital on Sunday rounding, had 2 newborns that were born, see babies, happy, enjoy life. And then I went and did a couple social visits, a couple of patients of mine that are inpatient currently. And they both have cancer that has returned and has spread. And so with the COVID-19 crisis, their loved ones are not allowed in the hospital. So they're sitting in a hospital bed with a situation that's not the cancer why they're in the hospital right now, with no family. And just, if you can imagine that emotion, if you can imagine the patients sitting crying because they can't see their loved one and they're scared and they don't know what's going on. If you can't be human in that moment, then we're not we're not doing right for our patients. So, to hold someone's hand, to tell them that you love them, that's important.
Indeed.
Vitally important to the psyche.
Indeed. Indeed. Speaking of like the COVID, I spoke with a nurse once before, not on the show, but I was speaking with a nurse, and she was telling me how in their unit they had a whole family, a family of 6, come in for COVID, and they all had tested positive.
Oh, wow.
Husband, wife, and 4 kids.
In New Orleans?
No, in New York. And one by one, they all died. And so for the nurse and that whole floor, that was a whole different kind of experience for them. They're used to dealing with, these one-and-ones coming in and one-offs, but to have a whole family, that was just a lot.
That's devastating.
Yeah.
That hurt. That hurts, man. That makes me emotional, actually.
So, I mean, what do you say to the doctors and the nurses and the professionals out there that are not only dealing with patients that, that come in, but, for them as well, when they talk about, dealing with grief and trauma?
I've talked to some of my colleagues in New York City. I've talked to a couple in Minnesota, some people in Ohio that I trained with in residency. Man, they and in Chicago too, where I train, and pretty much all over the country. Yeah, California, and it's that you're seeing a spectrum. Some people are dealing with the direct impact of the virus. And then, like me, I'm dealing with the indirect. So I'm not actually dealing with COVID patients, but I'm dealing with the sequelae of that, which is, so to them, one of my friends, she got the virus, but they didn't test her because she was doing well. They just sent her home for 2 weeks, and then her husband got sick. They were fine, but the mental adversity that has taken place is something that's going to have to be addressed. And I will tell you that a lot of the society, so the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American Osteopathic Association, the American Psychiatric Association, I get these emails all day, and people are talking about making sure that people do talk, that they go see a counselor, because you saw that one case where the physician, I think it was an ER physician, she took her own life. Yeah, because of all of the stress. So I would tell you that our administrators, from what I've seen, have been helpful with saying this is available, this is out there to you. But in terms of how it's going to break down once things, 3 months, 6 months, because complicated grief, we talk about that. Complicated grief is prolonged grief, right? 6 to 12 months at a minimum. I don't know what's going to happen long term. A lot of I will tell you that a lot of physicians cope the way that I cope. They work out, and they're not at work. They come home, get on the treadmill, or they go hug their kids, or there's a lot of various different things. But I think there is a very strong place for professional help for all these people that are on the front lines: doctors, nurses, janitors. The people that have to go in and clean those rooms. Having, like, you've got to put on the gear, you got to clean a room, and it takes you like 2 hours to clean a room, and someone just passed away. Like, that person's going to need assistance. It's not just, the shiny objects. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some signs that you can, one, for oneself to identify that they may be stuck dealing with grief? And what are some signs that a person could see, someone, in their surroundings or, around them is dealing with it?
So when someone passes away, or you're dealing with whether it's PTSD or complicated grief, if you see someone that has completely lost interest in those normal activities to life, right? Things that you love. So like if Greg Washington loves the bird watch, Now Greg Washington says, I don't care, I hate bird watching, doesn't do that. If someone loses interest in something that was once important and vital to them, that is a warning sign. Being disinterested is a very powerful indicator that something might be at play. Um, when it comes to complicated grief, if you're starting to take that grief and you're remembering a loved one and you're maybe obsessing over a loved one that has passed, holding on to things that just doesn't seems to be out of proportion with reality, that's a warning sign. Not eating, definitely a warning sign you'll see. Not taking care of themselves, being unkempt. Those are some basic things that you can kind of identify. But the interest thing is very powerful, because you see a loss of interest when people that have major depressive disorder. However, if this person didn't have that behavior to begin with, you know that something is probably wrong. So I would look for people having issues with sleep, interest, feeling guilty, low energy, not being able to concentrate, appetite is off. And sometimes people can physically, we call it psychomotor agitation. Like, it physically hurts to get out of bed. So if you start to see things like that, you need to see someone.
Gotcha. Okay. And what are some ways or what can we do to support a person that is dealing with grief and trauma?
The first thing, what I do in my practice is I don't think we can do anything until we have recognition, right? If you don't recognize that there is an issue that needs to be treated, we can't do it. And we have to do that gently. You can't, if you don't feel that there's a problem, then it's going to be hard to kind of reach that person. You diagnose someone with diabetes and they're not accepting that. It's going to be hard to control the diabetes. But if a person comes in and they've been married to a person for 50 years and they lose this person, there's going to be a lot of different feelings going on. You take that to someone younger, a loss of a child, or a bad diagnosis. I think it's recognition that it's okay to talk about that. It's recognition about it's okay to have whatever feelings that you're having, and then going from there. So then next steps is, coming up with a clinical assessment for these people and trying to figure out what is the next steps. Is this good enough? Just checking in with them every 3 or 6 months. Do they need to be sent to a psychiatrist or a psychologist? And then do they need mental health? Then do they need to be on pharmacotherapy? Like, these are all the types of different questions and options that are available to us. If we're dealing with a person is now having an issue with complicated grief and now they're having substance abuse, do we need to send them to a place that a social worker can help us with? So there's a lot of different options available to, but if we don't recognize it, you can't ever get the train started.
Got you. And I mean, it sounds complicated to get someone help, but it's really not. So even though, we say that there's all these different resources out here, and depending on what you're dealing with and how it marries together, you might need to take, medicines or go see a certain either social worker or therapist or doctor. But everybody has trained in these special skills to help you, right? So, I mean, the biggest part is understanding and being able to raise your hand and say, okay, hey, look, I have a problem, or I'm dealing with something, not necessarily that you have a problem, but I'm dealing with something and I could use help, right? At the very core of it.
Right.
And going to someone that can get you to the right person. And it may not be right the first time, but you don't give up and just find someone like Dr. Thurman that, is going to take care of you.
Right.
Right. So I definitely, I agree with you on that. I do. What's been the toughest part of your journey?
The toughest part?
Mm-hmm.
Telling my wife that I'm going to go to medical school when I was about to get out of the Army. That was the toughest part of my journey, because I see it. I feel how she felt. Like, here I am graduating from West Point. Now I'm going to become a doctor. And she left school because I got injured and couldn't walk for 2 years. So she moved from Kansas to New York to be with me when we were engaged. That was tough, man. Like that took a leap of faith on her part, and for us to support each other through the trials and tribulations of trying to negotiate a path that was not familiar, right? Like I don't have any doctors in my family. So what does this look like? Financially, what does this look like? We got to take out debt. You know, I'll tell you what happened to me this past September in 2019. Young lady that, man, she was dealing with some depression. She was dealing with anxiety for all of her life. And I became her physician. And we were on it, man. We were working, like trying to put her on a proper regimen of medications, encouraging her, telling her that she matters. And we finally got to the point where she'd gotten a job, she got a house, she had her dog, her and her boyfriend were good, but she still had those demons that she was dealing with in the back of her head. And the last time I saw her, I remember I told her, hey, you know what? You matter. You're important. And I gave her a hug. And she took her own life about 2 weeks after that visit. And I'm still struggling with that one because I can be as great as I want, Greg. I can be as optimistic and positive, and you can give me that feedback that things are good, but at the end of the day, I still don't know what's going on in your mind. So for me to have thought that I had made, and maybe I did have that positive impact on her life. Maybe she would have took it sooner. I don't know, but that's been a really, really, really tough thing to deal with, and something I've still wrestled with. Man. Losing the patient that way. It's not the first time, but this one was particularly unique because I thought we had turned a corner. But as we've learned with suicide is not something that you plan. It's something that kind of happens spur of the moment. So yeah, that's been tough.
Is there how do you define that? What is a name for that? Because I mean, for, like you said, to be positive, to be supportive, to be encouraging. And at the end of the day, it's really on the person to be their own source of light, because most of the time when you're in your darkest hour, you're normally alone.
Yeah.
Right. And so to be able to, it's one thing to have someone help you get talked off the ledge, right? But to be able to talk yourself off, right? Or to just be that spark of hope, for yourself. I kind of get the feel that that's what most people need to learn, right? Because when you are alone and you start to spiral these thoughts out of control, how do you stop that?
And that brings up an interesting point, is that did I, as the person that she was seeing that was caring for her, did I equip her for that? We were making progress because I was taking her off of the medications, but did I provide her with a checklist? Hey, if you get into this dark spot, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to think about. This is what you need to refer to. Did I write down that little piece of paper for her to identify those things when she's by herself? No. Will I do it going forward? Yes. 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 Man. And will that make a difference? I don't know. Maybe it'll give her an opportunity, or it'll give that individual maybe some pause, and maybe they'll decide not to. I've had other patients tell me that. So
I feel you. I mean, I just want to take a moment just because, it reminds me of so many people that have taken their life that I've known. And, with you in the medical field, with me, it was more with soldiers. I had an instance where a friend of mine was out, and something horrific happened, you know, with his unit. And so they let their anger and aggression get the best of them, and they ended up killing innocent people.
Yeah.
And so coming down off of that anger and aggression, they felt so guilty that they ended up, you know, taking their own life. And so like I feel you on so many different levels. And, you know, I just want to just take a moment just to, if you're out there, if you just take a moment to stop, just a split second to stop in that moment of being angry, in that moment of being devastatingly depressed, you might be able to save your life. You might be able to stop yourself from doing something that you may later regret and can't come back from. And so I'm right there with you, man. Like I'm damn near in tears, but I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I'm a little
a little caught up.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a little. Yeah.
The next question, you know, that I wanted to talk about, right, is that hurt people, right? So, you know, giving suicide or giving whether, you know, you're angry and irritable or depressed, and so you take it out on the folks around you,
Closest to you,
right? Have you had to deal with that? And if so, you know, how did you make amends?
Have I personally or with patients? Or
Both. I mean, because like you, being that you're a medical professional, you know, we can kind of have this conversation on both fronts, right? Yeah. Because I, you know,
I can take this. So I actually treated a husband and wife, and I didn't know this at the time, but the husband was struggling, and we were dealing with, you know, some testosterone issues. We were dealing with some depression issues, thyroid, and I was direct. I was compassionate. I was blunt. I was friendly, and I really focused on both of them sitting there. And he turned a corner, and he got better. He had more energy. He loved his wife. It was great. And one day I saw her. I saw his wife, and she said, "Thank you for what you did for my husband. You saved our marriage." It's just, you know, that takes you away when someone says that, because you're in your mind, you're thinking, "Oh, I didn't know you guys were on the outs." Personally, so I've got a friend that I've also been working with, and your question, I think what happens when we're in the military and we're used to giving orders, I think sometimes what happens is if we're experiencing certain experiences can kind of drive that behavior, and we can feel as though we can take things for granted. And I started to do that. I started to exhibit those behaviors, and it's interesting when it happened, because I can take you back. It happened in residency, you know, like, so here again, I'm not in combat now. Now I'm in residency. I'm an intern. I'm stressed. I got these rotations. I'm a new doctor, and it's very easy to just come home and dump or be negative or take someone for granted. And the reason I brought up the healthy behaviors of running is this is not something that you just hit a switch and you fix it. This is a continual process, or at least for me. And so I'm continually having to remind myself, little mantra, like I'll say in my head if I'm on the bike, you know, like, I love my wife. I love my patients. I love my job. But sometimes it's good to tell yourself that too. Remind yourself. And it's also been a new focus of mine. So I think taking for granted is the biggest thing. And that happened to me personally. But staying in the moment, being present is powerful. And I feel like these things can take us from being present, right? Like sometimes it's just nice just to sit there and be human with another person or the person that you love. And so that's been my new focus, is getting people to focus on being present in the moment.
Got you. Got you. And I mean, that kind of goes or leads into, the next question of, what kept you going when you wanted to give up, right? Through all of this.
Truthfully,
Mm-hmm.
man, I'm scared to death of mediocrity. I'm scared to death of failing. And right or wrong, like I look at there's a lot of reasons I became a physician. One was it's always something I wanted to do, but then didn't think I could do it. Two, experiences in Iraq with a family there showed me that I never wanted to be in a position where I felt like I couldn't help.
I didn't get that.
And then three, Greg, I think it's one of those situations where, I'm having a tough one with this. I became a physician because I didn't want my wife to look at me in a negative manner when she was completely happy with who I was. And I think a lot of the pressure and all of this I put on myself really wasn't necessary. So, yeah.
I got you. I do. Question. So, you are a servant to the people, right? Being a doctor. And so you're there to help others. Is it okay for other professionals to get help?
100%. 100%. And I've done it. I did it in the Army, and I also did it. I've done it when I was, since I've been a physician. Some of the greatest things I've ever done. It's actually a nurse that told me this in between a second or third surgery. And she's like, have you ever thought of speaking to someone? Because I think I was being irritable and kind of angry. And she's like, you've got that certain profile of people coming back from deployments. But in residency, for sure. Had, again, going back to that tough time, taking someone for granted, I was like, you need to check yourself. And so I used the employee assistance program and started seeing a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone should have a counselor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we had a good psychology program in my residency too. So we actually had a psychologist on staff so that we could go and we could meet with her. So I met with her too. Yeah.
Was so just speaking on the seeking professional help, did it make a difference about the race, gender, or background of your counselor?
I in my particular instance, I don't think that it did.
Should it?
Unfortunately, right or wrong, we're all human. And I think for some people, it does make a difference. So I think there needs to be systems in place for that. But when you get to talking about mental health and you start talking about psychiatry and you don't, I mean, this could lead us down another rabbit hole, but it leads us to, there's just not a lot of Black physicians. There's not a lot of Black nurse practitioners out there. So it's a challenge. And so then you look at places and cities like Chicago or New Orleans where you're at, where you have large African-American concentrations. But if the country has a need for physicians, then when you talk about how many Black physicians there are, That's a huge need. So there's just a huge deficit. But in my particular instance, me and my counselor, my psychiatrist, we got along very well. She was very good. She was very open.
Okay. Well, we won't run down that rabbit hole, but I appreciate you sharing. The biggest thing that I wanted to get out was that, you know, even as a professional, whether it be in the medical field or in corporate, right? You know, even being a CEO of a company or a top executive, it's okay to seek help.
Yes.
Right.
100%.
So tell me this. What advice would you give your younger self?
Relax. Relax, man. Like, the world, whether I'm here or not, is going to keep moving. So enjoy it. And I would tell you, Greg, that the thing I give my wife, I give Audrey a lot of credit, man. I think we found something. So I talked about running. I talked about writing. I talked about that as healthy behaviors. You know, I was a football player. Basketball was my first love. You know, these are things that give me joy. But with the seriousness of war and all of this and being a doctor and I'm the hospice medical director and I do this and I do that, I found an outlet for me. I found my thing that makes me whole or gives me purpose in this world. And I was resistant to it because you want to know why? Because of war. First time I left the country was to go to Iraq. So my wife wanted to travel. I'm like, I don't need to travel. When I got back, I was like, I don't want to see things. I've already seen things out there. And she stayed on me about that. She stayed and she was persistent. And so finally, I took that first trip, got that taste. And then the second trip, and then the third trip. And then all of a sudden now I've been to 40 plus countries. And that has really broadened who I am. Right. So like not everyone can just travel like that. I get that. But for me, travel has been kind of a way to bridge this balance with who I am and with what I do and with dealing with tough things in life. So I would strongly recommend travel. But if you're not able to do that, find something that you can call your own or find something that gives you a passion.
I like that. Especially, you know, the part of first time leaving out, you know, that was on the deployment, right? I mean, about the same year. So you come back home, you're like, yeah, no, I'm good. Like, I don't need to see the rest of the world. Like I've seen enough. I'm good right here. Yeah.
No, I'm gonna drive to New Mexico. That's my trip.
I get you. But learn to relax and learn what it takes to make yourself whole and find what makes you whole, right? Yes. Whether that's traveling or learning a new hobby or, you know, or something positive, right? So I appreciate that. Any resources or people you would like to share or give a shout out to before we close out?
Shout out to Audrey. Give a shout out to my mom, my dad, my sister, because they've seen me, you know, as a little ruffian become, I'm not a ruffian. I'd like to give a shout out to my partner, Dr. Mike Abu Asli. This young man is from Lebanon. He actually was a refugee, like left the country in the middle of a civil war. He's my partner. He's the reason why I'm here in Southeast Iowa working. All my boys out there on our happy hour, Gary, Nate, Coaxum, Nick, Vegas, Jermaine, T Sims, all those guys, give love to them. But Reggie Neville's, man. You know who else I give some props to? Lieutenant General Dan Chrisman. That man is instrumental. Can I get a quick story?
Mm-hmm.
He was a soup. He came in with my class. And so the night before our day, they had the big football reception and they're like, hey, everyone, the soup's going to be there. He's going to, you know, go ask him, you know, shake hands and all of this stuff. So he comes through and he's talking and he's like, how did you prepare? And then he comes up to me and so new cadet Thurman, what did you do to get ready for our day and to get ready for Beast? And I said, sir, I'm focused. About 2-3 days later, my TAC comes up to me. He's like, new cadet Thurman, I don't know what you did. Tomorrow during the soup's first address, you've got to go up on stage. I'm like, what? Like, this is mortifying. So what it turned out is he was impressed by, sir, I'm focused. And he presented me with his first coin that he ever gave out as the soup. And he said, to him, this is what defines this class, and this is what defines the mission of West Point. So new cadet Thurman, blah, blah. I got so much hell. I still get hell about that. Me standing up, standing there in front of the podium in Thayer Hall, but there's a lot of respect. And then 20 years passed, and the soup at this last Army Navy told everybody to stop giving him grief. Get off his ass. He was so it's kind of cool. And even 20 years later, Sir, I'm Focused is still present with the class of 2000.
Indeed. That's awesome. Any resources you want to shout out?
So mental health. I don't know how many referrals I do a week. We don't have enough counselors. But there's a company here. It's called ADS, helps with addiction services. They take care of people. I got a patient of mine that runs the transition for people that have just gotten incarcerated and they're getting back and going into a halfway house. He works for the state, doing great work, overwhelmed. But I'd like to give shout outs to Patrick Lacey.
Indeed. All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on. In closing, what are some last words of wisdom and encouragement?
Don't quit. If you're struggling, it's okay. If you're struggling and someone else is probably struggling, it's okay to reach out. It's okay to raise your hand and say, hey, I need help. You look at someone like a Michael Phelps, and he talks about his vulnerabilities. He talks about his depression, his anxieties. It's okay to talk about it. It really is. More people have it than they let on. But I will tell you this, embrace the process. And so what I mean by process in life, that's why you go to practice in sports, right? To get ready for the game. Life is like that. Embrace the process and recognize that there's going to be struggle. Recognize that's how we get better. And then I always leave with the Frederick Douglass quote, without struggle, there can be no progress. So we need to embrace that.
Indeed. Well, everyone, this is Dr. John Thurman and Greg Washington saying stay safe, stay focused, and stay engaged.
Awesome. Man, thanks, Greg. I appreciate you. I appreciate your mission, like I said at the beginning. If I can help, let me know.
All right. We're out. That's what it's really all about. Giving yourself a fighting chance to just show what you got.